Hello again and welcome to the video summary for What is a Human. This is week 6. I'm Dr. Chris Fleming and this week we looked at the human imitation. At the basis of this week's material was the notion of the human as Homo imitans. So as you probably know, we've come up with a whole series of designations throughout history about how to refer to human beings. The most common one, or our biological one, actually, or more technically what's called our binomial classification, is the human is Homo sapiens, right? As opposed to previous incarnations of hominids like Homo erectus and so on. But so Homo sapiens is usually the designation we give ourselves. Now, sapiens means thinker or reason, rational. Okay, so the idea of the human as the rational animal. Now, be that as it may, this week we're throwing a different emphasis and we're looking at the idea of the human as Homo imitans, that is the human as imitator. Now, that designation, as far as I'm aware, comes from Andrew Meltzoff, who's Professor of Developmental Psychology at the University of Washington. Now, the idea is that the human is fundamentally characterized by our imitative capacities. Now, what does that mean? Well, human beings go through a very long gestation period, right? So the people are pregnant for a comparatively long period of time. And then when the baby is born, the human baby is born, he or she is not able to do much. That is, they're very, very dependent on their carers for not just days or weeks or months, but in fact years. Now, why is that? Well, one of the reasons is human beings don't come out with a whole series of instincts that allow us to operate in our environment. Right? So animals, you know, puppies, when a puppy is born, they obviously need to feed and so on, but pretty soon they're independent. They don't have to be taught a whole series of things. There's not a lot of cultural or social knowledge that mama dog or papa dog passes down to the puppies. So non-human animals largely operate with instinct. Now, I'm simplifying matters greatly here, but I'm trying to give you some kind of notion of why the idea of Homo imitans is important. Now, so how is that different? Given that we don't have instinctual capacities in the same way as animals, that is, you know, after I was born, I didn't just start to speak English by myself. I had to have parents who were around me speaking English, and then I would start to speak English. I didn't learn to just dress myself genetically. I had to be shown how to do that. I had to copy. I didn't know how to, you know, eat properly even. Like, it's an amazing thing to think about in a sense. But, and so all these behaviors were learned. Now, what allows us to acquire those behaviours? If it's not instinct, well, the idea is that through imitation. Now, Meltzoff believes that it's after, well, at minimum, around at least 96 hours after we are born, we begin to imitate the people in our environment, which is an incredible kind of thing. So, you know, this is how we come to inhabit a culture. This is how we come to be who we are, is through internalization of our environment, the mimicry or imitation of people around us. Now, that doesn't happen consciously. It's not as though as a tiny little baby you say, I'm going to start to, you know, imitate my parents now. It simply happens. Now, that's quite a simple idea in one way, but the implications of that are absolutely huge. Now, the notion of Homo imitans, I say, is coined by Andrew Meltzoff, and I'm going to take up that notion in relation specifically to the work of the French anthropologist, philosopher and social theorist René Girard. But the idea of Homo imitans goes back, in fact, a very long way, at least 2,500 years, to Aristotle's Poetics, in which he says the human is the most imitative creature in the world and learns, first of all, through imitation. Nonetheless, we're going to be focusing on more contemporary thinkers in teasing out the implications of what this means for our thinking about the human. Now, there are imitative capacities, obviously, in non-human animals. Birds imitate each other's birdsong. Birdsong is often not, the capacity to sing is inherited in birds, but the particular tunes, as we'd say, the birds sing are not. And so very often those things are learned. There's certain kinds of other behaviours that are learned and in non-human animals, and this is especially so as we go up and get closer to genetically humans, so kind of in the ape species. Now think about for a moment why they call it apes, right? And the meaning of ape means to imitate. Anyway, but humans are vastly more imitative creatures than other non-human animals. Now, again, the implications for this are very, very large and important to point out. Now, one of the things is that we think about, if you think about imitation, most people think, well, this brings about social harmony, right? So we think the same, we have the same beliefs and values, we go to the same events, we're interested in the same things. And look, this is largely true. However, there is a potential for conflict in imitative behaviour, and that is through the convergence of desires on a single object. So if I'm with a friend and we go for the same football teams and we like the same foods and we enjoy the same kinds of activities, this is all fine until we want the same thing and there's only one. So both of us go for the same job and there's only one vacancy, or both of us fall in love with the same woman or fall in love with the same man, whatever. So what imitative behaviour can do is that it has this function of social cohesion to a certain point, but there's this incredible potential for conflict in mimetic behaviour because of the convergence of desires upon non-shareable objects, I guess you put it that way, or you might want to put it that way. Now, what is desire? The way I defined desire in the lecture was appetite plus symbolic representation. What does that mean? Well, human beings have certain basic biological desires. We get thirsty, we get hungry, we want to sleep, we get sexually aroused and so on. But, and this is true right across large parts of the animal kingdom. However, what happens with humans is that our particular mode of thinking complicates all that. Now, how does it complicate that? Well, we may be hungry for food, and that's an appetite, but what we want and the social significance of that, so you want gourmet food, or you want, I don't know, a meat pie to show that you're an Aussie or something, right? These things get complicated and wound in with our biological appetites. The second thing is human desire can operate independently of appetites, right? So you might go and buy a new jacket, not because you're cold, but because you just want another jacket. And that jacket supposedly represents you, or it has symbolic value to you, or status value to you, and so on. And humans copy each other in our desires. And so this is a really, really important thing to note, and that there are two ways in which those imitated desires can be mediated to us, right? So the first is what René Girard calls internally mediated desire. The second is externally mediated desire. Now, internally mediated desire is mimetic desire that can produce conflict. So it's the idea here is that if I'm in the same room as someone, in the same space, in the same social group, and we imitate each other, then there is a potential for conflict. We are internal. We're internal to a social space. We're both in that same space. So we can actually get into conflict with each other. Externally mediated desire is mimetic desire that operates where people are not in the same social space. Look, I'll just point at a very simple example. So imagine that your grandfather was a great carpenter and you copy his desire to be a great carpenter. You like good tools and you like to follow certain procedures. Now, you are not going to get into kind of a competition with your grandfather for his hammer or any of these kinds of things. You're not going to be trying to enter the same competition at the same time or win the same job or whatever. So you are separated historically. So it's mimetic desire. You're imitating your grandfather's desires, but you're not going to get into conflict with him because you're in different social spaces, even different spiritual spaces, different historical locations and so on. But internally mediated desire is that form of mimetic or imitative desire where there's potential for conflict. Now, there's just a few other things I wanted to add to this and a few other notions. One of the links from the previous week was the idea of the double bind. Now, the double bind, as you might remember, is a particular kind of injunction where two things are in conflict with each other. Now, in order to model a desire to someone, I am here, so, let's just say this great pencil, this fantastic, clutch pencil, one of the best in the world. You should really like it. Isn't it wonderful? Yeah, it is good, isn't it? It writes in an amazing way. The lead never breaks, but, you should really want it, but no, you can't have it. I'm sorry, because it's mine. Yep, want it? No, you can't have it. So there's a double bind in that. Want what I want, desire what I desire, don't desire what I desire, you can't have it. So there are forms of mimetic desire that do operate in a kind of double bind way. And this is one of the links that we have with last week's material. Now, two more ideas here. One of the things about desire, Girard says, is that ultimately it's metaphysical. That is, the idea is that ostensibly we want a particular object, but what we're really aiming at ultimately is the being of the mediator. So what does that mean? Well, if you look at contemporary advertising, this is really evident. So no Coke ad in the last 50 years at least has had anybody talking about the product. This is, you know, Coke is a black, nice, sweet, fizzy drink that everyone should enjoy. In fact, what you're shown in the advertisement's got nothing to do with the drink. It's about the people, right? And so what you're wanting, the advertisers are implying, is you want to have the being, the existence of those people, those attractive people with, I don't know, abs and tans and, you know, having a great time. What you're wanting is their actual being. So the product here, what is desired, is really just a way of getting to the mediator's being, their very existence. And this can happen at the individual social level. It doesn't have to be on television. You can imitate the desires of someone in order to somehow participate in their very existence, to be more like them. So this is an important thing to know. The last thing was, talked about psychopathology, and really this, despite the kind of fancy names, pseudomasochism and pseudo-sadism, the idea here is pretty simple. One of the pathologies of desire that we can get to is that we want what we can't have. That is, we are always attracted to the obstacle. How do we know what's valuable? Well, the pseudo-masochist is going to go for things that block them, because the only valuable things are the things from which I am blocked in getting, right? And so you have the person who only falls in love with married people, or you have, you know, anything that you can't have, that's what you want. Why do you want it? Because you can't have it. And why is that important? Well, but the fact that you're blocked from getting it, to the pseudo-masochist, signifies its value. Now, this is probably, as you guessed, not a great thing. Now, what Girard calls a dialectical reversal of that is the pseudo-sadist, someone who surrounds themselves with pseudo-masochists and treats them like dirt in order to feel, you know, that they have that kind of being, they have their own autonomy, and so on. Now, so this is basically the structure for basically all the main points to this week. Now, we ended up raising some questions about this, and one of them that you might want to think about is, where is human freedom in all of this? If it's the case that we end up imitating those in our social environment, then what do we make of human freedom? It seems that, does it seem in Girard's scheme that humans are determined in particular ways? Maybe, maybe not. It's something worth thinking about. The second thing you might want to think about is, where does rebellion come in all of this? What about people who say, I'm not going to do what you do, deliberately, right? You might even do the opposite of what someone does. So rather than imitate them, you flip that imitation on its head and you do the opposite. Now, these are things worth thinking about. With respect to the first, maybe the idea here is that we may not be absolutely free in a particular way, but we might be able to be aware of the ways in which our strings are pulled, the ways in which we are determined. The answer to the second might be is that the rebel is just still as mimetically entangled with their adversary as anyone else, or their mediator as anyone else, but they just do the opposite, right? So you're still beholden to the other, because you're still dependent on them. You want to know whether you're going to say yes or no. So you wait for them to say yes so you can say no. So you're still in some way bound to them. Look, there are some really big questions that are going to arise as a result of this. Now, next week, we're going to be looking at conflict. Because one of the things about mimetic behaviour is that, and if it leads to conflict, that certain forms of aggression are mimetic. Mob violence is a really well-known version of this. And there are very specifically human versions of this at the social level that we're going to need to look at and need to understand. In any case, I'm going to leave it there. And thank you for your patience. And I'll see you next week.